It was a typical afternoon in Los Angeles, the sun casting a golden glow over the sprawling city. A city where wealth and luxury were not just common, but expected. In the heart of the city, nestled among the towering skyscrapers, was an exclusive, high-end car dealership, Sterling Motors, known for selling the finest, most expensive cars money could buy. Inside, sleek Lamborghinis, Ferraris, and Bugattis gleamed under the bright showroom lights, their prices as intimidating as their performance. Gregory Sterling, a man who had inherited his father's fortune and expanded it into an empire, walked through the showroom doors. He was dressed impeccably, his tailored suit a perfect fit for a man who had everything: power, money, and respect. Or so he thought. He wasn't here for just any car today. No, today he was eyeing something special. A brand new Lamborghini Aventador. He'd been obsessing over it for weeks, and now it was within his reach. His eyes sparkled as he ran a hand over the smooth carbon fiber body. He could already imagine the roar of the engine, the thrill of driving it through the streets of Beverly Hills. "Isn't she a beauty?" a salesman said, approaching Gregory with a practiced smile. Gregory glanced up at the salesman, sizing him up for a moment before nodding. "It's perfect. I'll take it." The salesman's smile widened, but before he could begin discussing the paperwork, the sound of the dealership door opening interrupted him. A man walked in casually dressed in a simple black t-shirt and jeans. At first glance, he looked like just another average person, someone who didn't quite belong in a showroom like this. But as the man entered, all heads turned, including Gregory's. Something about him seemed different. There was a quiet confidence that wasn't about the clothes or the flashy accessories. It was about the way he carried himself. The man walked up to Gregory and offered a friendly smile. "Nice car you're looking at there," he said, his voice calm and warm. Gregory raised an eyebrow, slightly taken aback. He wasn't used to strangers speaking to him so casually, especially not in a place like this. He gave a polite but distant smile in return. "Yeah, it's the best," he said, clearly not wanting to engage too much. He was used to people treating him with deference, and this man certainly wasn't doing that. The man didn't seem fazed by Gregory's coldness. "I'm Keanu," he said, offering his hand. Gregory hesitated for a second. The name sounded familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. He extended his hand, shaking Keanu's with a firm grip. "Gregory," he replied, still sizing the man. "Up." "Gregory Sterling," Keanu said, his eyes brightening with recognition. "I've heard a lot about you. It's an honor to meet you." Gregory, ever the businessman, allowed himself a smug smile. He was used to people recognizing him, but he couldn't help but feel that Keanu's recognition wasn't the kind he was used to. There was no awe in Keanu's eyes, just an almost playful curiosity. "I'm just here for a car," Gregory said, brushing off the compliment. "But, thank you." He turned back to the Lamborghini, feeling that familiar rush of pride. Keanu chuckled softly, seemingly unfazed by Gregory's attitude. "Cars are nice," he said, his voice low but steady, "but I've come to learn that they're not the most important thing." Gregory's attention flickered back to Keanu. His curiosity piqued despite himself. The words seemed out of place, in a world where wealth was measured by possessions. "You don't think cars are important?" Gregory asked, amusement lacing his tone. Keanu shrugged nonchalantly, still looking at the cars around them. "I think what's important is how you use your time and who you spend it with," he said, his gaze now locking with Gregory's. "You can have all the cars in the world, but they won't give you real happiness." Gregory, who had built his life around accumulating things, cars, properties, power, couldn't help but laugh. "That's a nice thought, but I'm afraid I don't have the luxury of thinking that way. Money, possessions, they're what make the world go around. Without them, who are you?" Keanu smiled, but it wasn't a smile of agreement. It was almost a knowing smile, one that made Gregory feel, just for a moment, that maybe there was something he didn't quite understand about this man standing in front of him. "Well, Gregory," Keanu said, his voice still calm and even, "maybe one day you'll find out. Money is just a tool. It can buy comfort, but it can't buy the things that truly matter." Gregory's smile faltered. For a split second, he found himself questioning Keanu's words, but he quickly brushed it off. He was used to hearing philosophical musings from all sorts of people. They didn't mean much when you had everything in the world. "Thanks for the insight," Gregory said, his tone dismissive as he turned back to the car. "But I'll stick with what I know works." Keanu didn't respond immediately. He simply gave Gregory a look that seemed both understanding and a bit sad, before turning and walking out of the dealership, leaving Gregory standing there with a slight frown on his face. As Gregory took a seat in the Lamborghini and closed the door, he felt a strange tension in the air. Something about the encounter with Keanu had left him unsettled. The man's calm demeanor, his words, they stuck in his mind, lingering there like an itch he couldn't quite scratch. "Maybe I'm just imagining things," Gregory muttered to himself, shaking his head as he revved the engine. "I've got a car to buy." But as the engine roared to life, Gregory couldn't help but wonder, what if Keanu was right? What if there was more to life than just the things he could buy? "Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from," echoed the salesman's voice in the back of Gregory's mind. But this time the question felt a little different. What was it that truly pushed him forward? Gregory Sterling was a man accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted. From a young age, he had learned the art of using his wealth to bend the world around him. His father had built a fortune from the ground up, but Gregory had taken it to new heights. In the world he inhabited, money was not just a tool, it was the foundation of everything. It opened doors, bought respect, and provided control. But Gregory's world, for all its grandeur, was an empty one. He lived in a mansion on the outskirts of Beverly Hills, a modern fortress with sweeping views of the city. His home was a collection of rare art, designer furniture, and state-of-the-art technology, all meticulously curated to display his success. He didn't need to say much in the way of introductions. His wealth spoke for itself. Everyone in his circle knew that. People respected him for his empire, for his ability to command attention simply by walking into a room. Yet beneath the polished surface, something gnawed at Gregory. It was a quiet, unspoken emptiness that even he couldn't ignore, though he preferred to keep it buried. His relationships were transactional, business partners, clients, even friends. They were all part of the same game. And Gregory played it well. That evening, as Gregory sat at his massive oak desk, finalizing the purchase of his new Lamborghini, he couldn't shake the thought of Keanu Reeves. The actor's words kept echoing in his mind, an unsettling hum in the back of his thoughts. "Money is just a tool. It can buy comfort, but it can't buy the things that truly matter," Gregory scoffed. What does he know? But the truth was, Gregory didn't know the answer to that question. Keanu's words had gotten under his skin in a way he couldn't explain. Was he truly that shallow? Could it be that all of his wealth, all the things he had so carefully collected, meant so little in the grand scheme of things? He leaned back in his leather chair, the plush comfort surrounding him, and for the first time in a long while he found himself questioning the very foundation of his life. It was late, and Gregory's thoughts drifted to his childhood. Growing up in the shadow of his father's towering legacy, Gregory had learned that success was measured in power and possessions. His father had built an empire, and Gregory had inherited it, along with the expectation that he would do more, be more. There was no room for weakness in his world, no room for softness, for emotional connections. His mother had left when he was young, and his father had never remarried. Gregory had been raised by nannies and tutors, taught to focus on the bottom line, to view relationships through a lens of utility. Love, family, those things were optional, and Gregory had long ago convinced himself that they were distractions from the true goal: success, fame, and wealth. But as he sat in the massive office of his mansion, the walls closing in around him with the weight of his thoughts, he realized that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than he had been taught. The following morning, Gregory found himself driving the new Lamborghini through the streets of Los Angeles, a city he knew well but had never truly explored. The engine purred beneath him as he sped down Sunset Boulevard, the sunlight glinting off the car's sleek surface. But even as the adrenaline surged through him, he couldn't shake the emptiness that lingered in his chest. He was supposed to feel invincible. The Lamborghini was his trophy, a symbol of everything he had accomplished. Yet as the city sped by, he felt Nothing. The rush of the car, the admiration of passers-by, it all felt hollow. He was just another man behind the wheel of a machine. At a red light, Gregory glanced at the rearview mirror, and for a split second, he swore he saw the reflection of a man. But not just any man. Keanu. The same quiet confidence, the same gentle demeanor. It was as though he was haunting him. Gregory shook his head and glanced around. No, it couldn't be him. But that brief moment, that reflection, brought him back to that conversation in the dealership. True wealth, Keanu had said. It's about the relationships you build. The experiences you share, not the things you collect. Gregory had dismissed those words the first time he'd heard them, but now as he sat behind the wheel of his prized possession, they kept creeping back into his mind. The light turned green, and Gregory pushed the pedal to the floor. The car roared to life, but even as it surged forward, he couldn't shake. The feeling that something in his life was missing. Maybe it wasn't just the car. Maybe it wasn't the money. Maybe it was something more. Later that day, Gregory had a meeting scheduled with his longtime business partners. As he entered the polished, glass-walled boardroom, he was greeted with the usual show of respect, handshakes, nods, and polite smiles. But Gregory's mind wasn't on the numbers being discussed. Instead, he found himself thinking about Keanu's words, about the idea of true wealth, of connection. The meeting was important, but something about it felt trivial. His partner, John, was in the middle of presenting a new deal when Gregory interrupted him. "John, what's the point of all this?" he asked, his voice quieter than usual. John, clearly taken aback, paused. "The point? Gregory, we're making millions here. We're building something massive. This is what we've been working toward." Gregory leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "Is it? Or is it just another game? Another way to measure who has the bigger empire?" John stared at him, uncertain. "Gregory, what's going on?" "This is why we've been successful. You've built everything from scratch. You have everything." Gregory looked around the table at the men who had become his closest allies. But in that moment, they all seemed so small, so trapped in the same cycle he had been living. It wasn't just business to them. It was life. And Gregory was beginning to wonder if that life was worth living. He stood up suddenly, the chair scraping across the floor. "I need a break," he muttered, his voice distant. "Are you all right?" John asked, but Gregory was already halfway to the door. He needed space, to think, to figure out what had been bothering him all this time. As he stepped out into the cool air of the city, Gregory couldn't escape the nagging feeling that he was on the edge of something bigger than his wealth, something deeper than his empire. But what was it? And what would it take to find it? The following week, Gregory found himself in a place he never thought he'd be. A coffee shop, not one of the posh, exclusive cafes where he would be met with knowing glances from the baristas and the aroma of overpriced blends. No, this was a quiet, unassuming corner cafe nestled in the heart of downtown Los Angeles. The kind of place where the average person came for a simple cup of coffee and perhaps a brief escape from the noise of the city. It wasn't a place Gregory would typically visit. But here he was, standing in line, scanning the menu, as if it were his first time ordering a cup of coffee. He couldn't quite put his finger on why he'd come here. Maybe it was because he'd heard that Keanu frequented spots like this, or perhaps it was just the growing discomfort of his own life that had led him to seek something different. Something real. The barista behind the counter smiled as Gregory stepped up. She was young, with bright eyes and a friendly expression. "What can I get for you today?" she asked, already knowing what most customers ordered before they spoke. Gregory hesitated for a moment, then something unexpected came to him. "A black coffee, please, no sugar, no cream." The barista nodded. "You got it, that'll be $3.50. Gregory barely registered the price. A coffee was nothing to him, yet the act of ordering something so simple, so unremarkable, felt oddly refreshing. He handed over the cash and waited, leaning against the counter as he observed the people around him. He saw businessmen in suits, students hunched over laptops, and families enjoying a casual morning together. There was something about it all that felt different. He took his coffee and sat down at a small table by the window. The noise of the bustling street outside filtered in, but inside everything seemed calmer, more grounded. as he sipped his coffee. He glanced around, his mind still spinning with questions. What was it that Keanu had said to him? True wealth isn't in the things you own, but in the relationships you build. Gregory had dismissed those words at first, but now they lingered in his thoughts like an unshakable echo. In his world, relationships had always been transactional. People came into his life because they needed something from him, whether it was money, status, or influence. And in return, he gained loyalty, or so he believed. But what about real, meaningful connections? What did that even look like? His phone buzzed on the table, dragging him out of his reverie. It was a text from his assistant. Meeting with John and the board at 3:00 p.m. Don't forget, Gregory didn't feel the usual urgency. He wasn't excited about another round of discussions on investments and acquisitions. In fact, he didn't feel like his usual self at all. His mind wasn't on business or deals. It was on what Keanu had said, and why those words had planted themselves so deeply in his mind. "Hey, man, is this seat taken?" a voice interrupted his thoughts. Gregory looked up to see a man, likely in his late 20s, standing by his table. He wore a worn hoodie and a pair of jeans, the kind of clothes that screamed comfort over fashion. He looked like someone who had just rolled out of bed, yet there was something genuine about him, an honesty that was refreshing in contrast to the polished world Gregory inhabited. Gregory looked around. The cafe wasn't exactly packed, but it wasn't empty either. There was a seat at the table next to him. "No, go ahead," Gregory said, gesturing for the man to sit. The stranger smiled and slid into the seat, taking a moment to get comfortable. He had a coffee cup in his hand, steaming slightly. "Thanks, man," the stranger said, taking a sip of his coffee. "I'm Michael, by the way." "Gregory," Gregory replied, offering a small nod. Michael glanced at Gregory, studying him, for a moment as if weighing the situation. "You look like you're lost in thought," he said casually, a hint of curiosity in his voice. "You seem out of place here." Gregory paused. Most people wouldn't dare make such an observation, but there was something about Michael's laid-back demeanor that made him feel like he wasn't being judged. He wasn't sure why, but he decided to be honest. "I guess I'm just trying to figure something out," Gregory said, almost surprised by his own words. "Been questioning a lot of things lately. My whole life, really." Michael nodded, taking another sip of his coffee. "Yeah, I get that. Life has a way of making you rethink everything when you least expect it." He leaned back in his chair, his eyes thoughtful. "What's been on your mind?" Gregory paused for a moment. What was on his mind? He didn't even know how to begin, but something about Michael made it easy to talk. "I've spent my whole life chasing after wealth, the best cars, the most expensive suits, the biggest house, and I've always thought that was the goal. But lately, I don't know, it just feels empty." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Empty? You mean you've got everything anyone could ever want, and you're saying it feels empty?" "Exactly," Gregory replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been wondering if it's all just a distraction. What am I really doing with my life? I mean, sure, I've made money, but at what cost?" Michael stared at him for a long moment, as if processing the depth of Gregory's words. Then, finally, he spoke. "Money's not the problem, man. It's what you do with it that matters. You could be the wealthiest guy in the world, but if you're doing it all alone, what's the point? Life's not about just having things. It's about what you do with what you have. You gotta have a reason, something bigger than just collecting stuff." Gregory looked at Michael, surprised by the wisdom in his words. It wasn't something he expected to hear from someone who appeared to be just another regular guy in a coffee shop. But Michael's words struck a chord in him, and for the first time in a long while, Gregory started to feel that maybe, just maybe, he had been living the wrong kind of life. "Do you ever think you could be happy without all the things you have?" Michael asked, sipping his coffee again, his eyes watching Gregory closely. Gregory didn't answer immediately. He sat there, his mind racing. Could he really be happy without the things that defined him? The cars, the house, the wealth? Was it possible to let go of the life he'd built and find something more meaningful? The thought lingered in his mind like a seed, taking root. Maybe, just maybe, it was time for him to step outside the world he had built and explore what real wealth meant. Not the kind that could be measured in dollars, but in something deeper. The door to the cafe opened, and Gregory glanced up as a few more customers walked in. The bustling world outside was still there, but for a moment he felt like he was seeing it from a new perspective. A different kind of wealth, one that wasn't defined by material things, was beginning to take shape in his mind. And for the first time in years, Gregory felt the stirrings of something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The days following his encounter with Michael at the coffee shop were a blur for Gregory. Despite the busy schedule, the meetings, and the constant stream of emails demanding his attention, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted within him. It was as if a quiet ripple had moved through his life, disturbing the calm waters of his usual routine. Each morning as he woke in his sprawling mansion, surrounded by luxury, he felt a pull towards something different, something more. The emptiness he had tried so hard to ignore was now impossible to avoid. He couldn't stop replaying Michael's words in his mind. It's not about just having things, it's about what you do with what you have. Gregory found himself questioning every choice he had made up until now. The cars, the mansions, the exclusive parties, the endless transactions. Had they really given him happiness, or had they simply filled the void in his heart with fleeting distractions? He wasn't sure what the answer was yet, but he knew he had to start searching for it. That weekend, Gregory took a step he never thought he would. He decided to visit a local charity organization. It wasn't his style. In fact, charity had always seemed like a waste of time to him. People gave money to causes to make themselves feel better, to look good in front of others. It was all just another form of transactional relationships, but something in him, something deep and unspoken, told him it was time to try something new. The organization he chose was a homeless shelter for families, a small, modest building, tucked away in a less glamorous part of Los Angeles. It wasn't a place where the wealthy usually spent their time, but Gregory felt compelled to go. Maybe it was the desire to see how people with so little lived, or maybe it was his curiosity about what true connection really meant. He wasn't entirely sure, but he was determined to find out. When he arrived, the sight of the building struck him with a feeling of humility. The paint on the walls was chipped, the windows were small, and the parking lot had cracks in it. This wasn't the type of place he usually associated with success or importance. As he walked in, the head of the shelter, a woman named Maria, greeted him warmly. She was in her late 40s with a warm smile and kind eyes. She didn't seem impressed by his wealth, nor did she seem to care. Gregory found that refreshing. She led him through the shelter, introducing him to the families who had found refuge there. There were mothers holding young children, elderly individuals sitting in quiet corners, and fathers who were working hard to get back on their feet. Each family had their own story, their own challenges. But what struck Gregory the most wasn't the desperation in their eyes. It wasn't the obvious lack of resources or the grim circumstances. What he noticed instead was the sense of community. The way the families supported each other, shared meals and laughed together despite their hardships. They weren't just surviving, they were living. Gregory felt a lump form in his throat as he watched one mother teaching her children to play a game. Despite their situation, they seemed so full of life, so full of love. Maria noticed his silence and gave him a knowing look. "It's not what we have that makes us rich," she said quietly, her eyes thoughtful. "It's who we have. The people around us, the love we give and receive, that's true wealth." Her words echoed in his mind, mirroring Michael's earlier thoughts. And in that moment, something clicked for Gregory. He had spent so many years accumulating things, thinking that wealth was about possessions. But these families, despite having so little, had something far more valuable: each other. Gregory spent the next several hours at the shelter, talking to people, listening to their stories, and observing how they interacted with one another. It was eye-opening. He had never before experienced such raw, unguarded connection. There was no pretension, no agenda, just people supporting each other through the ups and downs of life. As the day came to an end, Gregory found himself feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time: gratitude. The warmth in the shelter, the way people cared for one another, was something he had never known in his own life. The people there weren't defined by what they had, but by who they were and how they cared for each other. Maria walked him to the door as the sun began to set. "Thank you for coming today," she said. "It means a lot to us." Gregory smiled, but it was a smile tinged with sadness. "No, thank you," he replied. "I think I've learned more today than I ever expected." As he drove back to his mansion that evening, his mind was spinning. The faces of the people at the shelter, their laughter, their resilience, it all played over and over in his mind. It was so simple, yet so profound. He had spent years believing that his wealth, his material possessions, were the key to happiness. But now he saw that he had been missing the most important part of the equation: connection, real, authentic relationships, the kind that transcended wealth and status. For the first time in his life, Gregory wasn't focused on his next business deal or the next luxury item to add to his collection. He was focused on something far more meaningful, making a difference in the lives of others and building genuine connections. The next morning, Gregory woke up with a new sense of purpose. He wasn't sure exactly what his next step would be, but he knew that his journey had just begun. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be something he could measure in dollars and cents. But for the first time in a long time, he was excited about what the future might hold. As he stood at the window of his mansion looking out over the city, Gregory finally understood what Keanu Reeves had meant when he said, "True wealth isn't about the things you own. It's about the relationships you build, the love you give, and the impact you make." And for the first time, Gregory believed it. Gregory couldn't shake the feeling that something inside him had changed. It had been a week since his visit to the shelter, and every moment since then his life had felt a little different. He found himself thinking less about the next big deal and more about how he could be a part of something meaningful. He wasn't quite sure what that meant yet, but he felt the pull to explore it. One evening, as he was returning to his mansion after a day of meetings that had felt increasingly hollow, Gregory's phone buzzed. It was a text from Keanu. "How are you doing? Did you get a chance to reflect on what we talked about?" Keanu's message felt like a nudge, a gentle reminder that the journey wasn't over. Gregory sat down on the couch and stared at the message for a moment. Should he reply? Would Keanu even care? He wasn't sure, but he had learned something that day, something he didn't fully understand, and he felt the need to share it. He typed back, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. I'm starting to realize that there's more to life than just accumulating things. I went to a shelter the other day, and it really made me think about what's truly important. I guess I've been living in a bubble, focused on the wrong things." He'd send before he could second-guess himself. A few minutes later, his phone buzzed again. "I'm glad you're reflecting. That's a big step. The world has a way of showing us the truth when we're ready to see it. But this isn't just about realizing that things aren't everything. It's about creating a new path, finding where you can make a difference. You're on the right track." Gregory read the message and felt a spark of hope flicker within him. Create a new path. The idea seemed so simple yet so profound. Could he really change? Could he break free from the life he had built for so long and find something more fulfilling? The next day, Gregory made a decision. He reached out to a few of the people he had met at the shelter and began to form a plan to get more involved, with causes that aligned with his new perspective. He started by offering financial support, but also by asking how he could help beyond just writing a check. What if he could use his influence to make real change? What if he could connect with others on a level that didn't involve money or status? Soon his life became a whirlwind of new activities. Gregory started mentoring young entrepreneurs who were passionate about social change, using his business expertise to help them succeed. He volunteered his time, not for the media attention or the tax breaks, but because he genuinely wanted to be there. He began to form real relationships, not with people who wanted something from him, but with people who shared his new vision for a more connected, compassionate world. Yet, even as Gregory started to feel more fulfilled, there was still a lingering sense of doubt. Was he really making a difference, or was he just putting on a good show? Was it possible to truly change, Or was he merely trying to buy his way into something more meaningful? His doubts began to fade, however, when he received an invitation from Keanu. The message was simple: "Join me this weekend at a retreat in the mountains. I think you'll find it useful." Gregory hesitated. He had no idea what the retreat was about, but something told him he needed to go. Keanu had become a guiding figure in his life, even if they barely knew each other. There was wisdom in Keanu's words, and Gregory was eager to learn more. That Saturday, Gregory found himself in the mountains, surrounded by breathtaking views and the calm stillness of nature. The retreat was set up in a rustic lodge with no distractions, no phones, no work, just peace and reflection. Keanu greeted him at the entrance with his usual warm, unassuming smile. "Glad you made it," Keanu said. "This place is about unplugging from everything, the noise, the distractions, the expectations. It's about reconnecting with what really matters." Gregory felt out of his element. He was used to being in control, used to the hustle and bustle of business. Being surrounded by nothing but nature and quiet felt uncomfortable, but he pushed through it, reminding himself that change wasn't supposed to be easy. Over the next few days, Gregory participated in group discussions, meditation sessions, and activities that challenged him in ways he never expected. It wasn't about learning the next business strategy or making connections with influential people. It was about something deeper. It was about slowing down and reflecting on the life he had lived, and the life he wanted to create. One afternoon, as they were sitting in a circle on the lawn, Keanu led a discussion on what it meant to truly serve others. "True wealth," Keanu said, "comes not from what you have, but from what you give. And it's not about grand gestures or showy acts of charity. It's the quiet, everyday moments when you choose to help, when you choose to show up for someone." Gregory listened intently, his heart stirring with each word. Keanu's wisdom felt like a lifeline, pulling him further away from his old life and closer to something much more meaningful. After the retreat, Gregory returned to Los Angeles with a renewed sense of purpose. He continued his work with the shelter and expanded his efforts to support local initiatives that empowered underprivileged communities. He didn't just write checks anymore. He was in the trenches, working side by side with those who had nothing. He found himself drawn to the simplest of joys, helping a single mother secure a job, mentoring a young entrepreneur who had an idea to change the world, or sitting with a homeless man who just needed someone to listen. Gregory had come to understand that wealth wasn't just about giving money. It was about giving time, compassion, and care. It was about investing in people, building relationships, and creating a legacy of love and impact. It was during one of these quiet moments, sitting in a modest office at the shelter, that Gregory received another message from Keanu. "Dimba, proud of you, Gregory. You're finding your true wealth. Keep going." For the first time in his life, Gregory felt the weight of that message settle into his soul. It wasn't about the accolades, the wealth, or the recognition. It was about knowing that he was finally living a life that mattered, and that, in itself, was more valuable than anything he had ever owned. Weeks passed, and Gregory found himself embracing his new life more fully than he ever imagined possible. Each day felt like an opportunity for growth and discovery, not in the material sense, but in a deeper, more meaningful way. He began waking up early to spend time at the shelter, helping with their programs, learning from the people he once viewed as beneath him, and slowly gaining a profound understanding of what true wealth really meant. But even as Gregory embraced this transformation, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more to learn. The idea of giving, of living for others, had become so central to his life, but he still hadn't fully understood how to truly live in harmony with those around him. He was still grappling with how to reconcile his past life, the one that had been dominated by greed and ambition, with the new values he was beginning to embrace. One rainy afternoon, as Gregory sat in his office at the shelter, sorting through the paperwork for a new outreach initiative, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Keanu. "Hey Gregory, it's time for another lesson. I think you're ready." The simple text piqued Gregory's curiosity. Another lesson? He had learned so much already, yet something about Keanu's message made him feel like he had only scratched the surface. What more was there to learn? Without hesitation, Gregory replied, "What do you mean?" "I'm ready." Keanu's response came almost instantly. "Meet me at the coffee shop where we first met. I'll explain everything." Gregory had no idea what to expect, but he trusted Keanu now more than anyone else. He had seen firsthand the wisdom in Keanu's words, and if there was something more to learn, he was eager to discover it. That evening, Gregory found himself back at the same cafe, the very place where their paths had crossed months ago. It had become a quiet, familiar spot for him, and as he walked in, he couldn't help but smile at the memories. He spotted Keanu, in the corner, sitting quietly with a coffee in front of him. "Hey," Gregory greeted, pulling up a chair. "What's this all about? Another lesson?" Keanu looked up with a smile, his eyes kind and knowing. "You're on the right track, Gregory, but there's one thing you still haven't learned. It's the most important lesson of all." Gregory raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What's that?" Keanu took a deep breath before answering. "You've been learning how to give, how to serve others, how to help, and that's great, but there's something that goes hand in hand with giving, something that can be even harder to accept than giving, and that's receiving." "Receiving?" Gregory repeated, puzzled. "I don't understand." Keanu leaned forward, his voice steady and calm. "Most people who live their lives focused on giving forget how to receive. And I'm not just talking about receiving gifts or compliments. I'm talking about allowing others to help you, allowing yourself to be vulnerable, because when you allow yourself to receive, you give others the opportunity to be part of your life, to truly connect with you." Gregory felt a knot form in his stomach. He hadn't thought about it that way before. He had always been the one in control, the one who helped, the one who offered. He was the giver, never the receiver. The idea of letting others help him, of relying on them in any way, made him feel uncomfortable. "You see," Keanu continued, "true wealth isn't just about what you give to others. It's also about the relationships you allow people to build with you. And to do that, you have to be open to receiving love, support, care, and even criticism. It's a cycle. You can't keep giving forever without allowing yourself to be filled up as well." Gregory sat back, processing what Keanu had said. The words felt heavy in his chest, but they also felt like a revelation. He had spent his life pushing others away, maintaining an emotional distance, never letting anyone truly get close to him. He had prided himself on being self-sufficient, on not needing anyone. But now he realized his life had been incomplete. "You're saying I've been blocking real connection by not letting others help me?" Gregory asked, a mix of confusion and understanding in his voice. Keanu nodded. "Exactly. It's easier to give. It's harder to receive. But the more you open yourself up to others, the more you allow them to support you, the more genuine and fulfilling your relationships will become. And in turn, you'll be able to give even more." Gregory thought about his past relationships, the business deals, the transactions, the fleeting friendships. He had always kept a wall up, never truly allowing anyone to see him for who he was or to help him when he needed it most. Now, he saw that this wall had kept him isolated from the very connections he had been seeking. It wasn't just about helping others. It was about being open to letting others help him in return. "So how do I start?" Gregory asked quietly. Keanu smiled. "You start by being vulnerable. You start by asking for help when you need it. You allow yourself to be human, with all the imperfections that come with it. It's not about weakness, it's about strength, the strength to accept love and support." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Gregory didn't know what to say. He had come so far, but this new lesson felt like a mountain he wasn't sure he could climb. Keanu seemed to sense his hesitation and gave him an encouraging look. "You've already taken the hardest step, Gregory. You're already learning to give. Now all you have to do is open your heart and allow yourself to receive. It's the last piece of the puzzle." As Gregory left the cafe that night, his mind buzzed with a whirlwind of emotions. He wasn't sure how he would do it, but he knew that this lesson was the final key to unlocking a life he had never thought possible. And deep down, he felt ready. Ready to receive, ready to be vulnerable, ready to build the true wealth that came from authentic relationships and a life of deep connection. It was the beginning of something new, something transformative. He had learned how to give. Now it was time to learn how to receive. The days after the conversation with Keanu were filled with reflection, and Gregory felt the weight of the lesson about receiving slowly sinking in. It was one thing to understand the concept, but it was another to actually put it into practice. In his previous life, he had built walls so high around himself that letting anyone in, really letting them in, felt impossible. But Keanu's words kept echoing in his mind. True wealth isn't just about what you give. It's also about what you allow others to give you. Gregory started small. He reached out to a few people from his past, friends he had long lost touch with. At first it felt awkward, like stepping into a new world. He asked for help in ways that felt uncomfortable, asking a former colleague to mentor him on something outside of business, opening up about his own vulnerabilities, and admitting that he didn't have all the answers. It wasn't easy, but each small step helped him feel a little lighter, a little more open. One evening, after a particularly difficult day spent at the shelter, Gregory sat alone in his office, his mind racing. The new initiatives he had launched were beginning to gain traction, but there was still so much to do. He had helped set up workshops for job training, mentorship programs for young entrepreneurs, and even a food pantry for those who couldn't afford a meal. Yet there were moments when the sheer weight of it all left him feeling exhausted, unsure if he was truly making a difference. As he sat there, lost in thought, his phone buzzed. It was another message from Keanu. "I've been thinking about you. How are you doing with the receiving part?" Gregory smiled, even though there was no one around to see it. Keanu had a way of checking in that felt both gentle and direct, like a friend who knew exactly what you needed even when you didn't. "I'm trying," Gregory replied. "It's harder than I thought, but I'm starting to understand. I'm reaching out to people more, asking for help when I need it." The response came quickly. "Good, keep it up. But don't forget, receiving isn't just about asking for help. It's about being open to receiving love, care, and kindness from others without guilt. That's where the real change happens." Gregory put down his phone and leaned back in his chair, his mind digesting Keanu's words. Receiving love without guilt. That was the missing piece. Gregory had spent so much of his life giving to others, but when it came to receiving love, he always felt like he was imposing. He always felt like he had to give something in return. But now he began to realize that it wasn't just about getting something back. It was about allowing others to express their care and affection freely, without any expectation of reciprocation. The next day, Gregory decided to take another small step. He invited one of the shelter volunteers, Sarah, to coffee. She was someone he had worked closely with, and over the months he had come to admire her dedication and kindness. She had always been a quiet presence, working hard without seeking attention. Gregory knew that she had her own struggles, but she never complained. As they sat at the cafe, sipping their drinks in comfortable silence, Gregory finally spoke up. "Sarah," he began, "I wanted to thank you for everything you do here, for your time, your heart. You've really made a difference, and I'm not sure I've ever properly acknowledged that." Sarah looked up, surprised by his words. "Gregory, I'm just doing my part. I'm happy to help." Gregory smiled, but there was something else he needed to say. "I've been learning a lot lately about receiving, and honestly, I don't think I've ever truly accepted the help or love that people like you offer. I've always thought I needed to be the one giving, the one in control, but I'm starting to realize that's not the whole picture, and I just wanted you to know that I see you. I appreciate you. I'm grateful." The words hung in the air, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Sarah's eyes softened, and Gregory could see that she was moved. "You don't have to thank me," she said quietly. "We're all in this together, but I'm glad you're starting to see what really matters. Sometimes the hardest thing is letting people be there for you. You don't always have to be the strong one." Gregory nodded, the weight of her words settling deep within him. Sarah had been right. He didn't always have to be the strong one. He didn't always have to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. It was okay to lean on others, to let them support him in the way he had supported them. As they finished their coffee, Gregory felt a shift within himself. The discomfort of vulnerability was still there, but it was no longer overwhelming. Instead, it felt like an invitation to connect with others on a deeper level, to share in life's challenges and joys together. That evening, Gregory reflected on the conversation with Sarah. It had been such a small moment, but it felt like a breakthrough. He wasn't just giving to people anymore. He was allowing himself to receive the gift of their presence, their support, their love. And in doing so, he was building something stronger, something more meaningful than anything he had ever known. Over the next few weeks, Gregory continued to push himself further out of his comfort zone. He reached out to more people, opened up in ways he had never done before, and allowed himself to be vulnerable with those around him. Each time he did, he felt the walls around his heart begin to crumble, piece by piece. It wasn't easy, but it was liberating. One evening, as Gregory was leaving the shelter after a long day, he saw Keanu waiting for him by the door. There was something different in Keanu's expression, a quiet pride that spoke volumes. "Hey, Gregory," Keanu said with a smile. "I've been hearing a lot about the work you've been doing, and I've seen the change in you. You're not just giving anymore. You're allowing yourself to receive, and that's what makes all the difference." Gregory smiled, his heart swelling with gratitude. "Thanks, Keanu. I couldn't have done it without you. You've opened my eyes to something I never even considered before. It feels like the right path." Keanu nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You're on the right track. But remember, the journey doesn't end here. It's a lifelong process. You'll continue to learn, continue to grow. And the more you embrace both giving and receiving, the more you'll see how truly rich your life can be." As Gregory walked away from the shelter that evening, he felt lighter, more at peace. The path ahead wasn't always clear, but he was beginning to trust it. And for the first time in a long while, he felt truly connected to the people around him, to the world, and to himself. This was just the beginning. As Gregory's life continued to transform, he began to experience moments of growth that I could have never predicted. But just as he was becoming comfortable with the changes he had made, a new challenge appeared on the horizon, one that would test not only the lessons he had learned, but also his commitment to the new path he was forging. It all began with a phone call one crisp morning, just as Gregory was finishing up a meeting at the shelter. He glanced at his phone and saw that it was his old business partner, Richard. Richard was someone from his past life, a man who embodied everything Gregory had once aspired to be: powerful, wealthy, and influential. They had worked together on some of the most lucrative projects in their industry, but their partnership had ended when Gregory had walked away from the world of high finance and luxury. "Gregory, it's been a while." Richard's voice came through the phone, smooth and confident. "I've been hearing some interesting things about what you've been up to. Running a shelter now, huh? That's a big change from the life we used to live." Gregory paused, feeling a mixture of emotions rise within him. Richard had always been a reminder of everything he had walked away from, but there was no denying the pull of the past, the allure of wealth, and the comfort it offered. "Yeah, things have changed," Gregory replied cautiously. "What's going on, Richard?" "I'm hosting a charity gala next month," Richard said, his tone a little too casual. "I'd like to invite you. It's a great opportunity for you to reconnect with some of the people you used to know, wealthy donors, business magnates, the kind of people who could really help you take your shelter to the next level." Gregory felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He hadn't attended events like this in months. The idea of stepping back into that world of excess, of pretending to belong in a room full of people who valued material success above all else, felt uncomfortable. "I don't know." "Richard, I'm not sure that's the environment I want to be in anymore." Richard's voice took on a more persuasive tone. "Gregory, listen, I know you've changed, but this could be a great opportunity. You want to make a real difference, right? You need the right connections, the right funding. You're not going to get that by staying isolated in your little world. Come on, it's just one night. You don't have to buy into everything. But you might be able to make a bigger impact." Gregory hesitated. The temptation was strong, the idea of having access to influential people, the possibility of getting the shelter, the support it needed, was undeniably appealing. But as the Words hung in the air. He couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in his chest. "I'll think about it," Gregory finally said, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "I'll let you know." After the call ended, Gregory sat in silence, feeling torn. His mind kept racing back to the lessons he had learned, to Keanu's words about true wealth and the importance of giving, receiving, and connecting with people. This gala represented everything he had left behind, everything he had learned to walk away from. But it also held the potential for something that could benefit the shelter and the people who depended on it. He spent the rest of the day reflecting on the choice in front of him. He talked with a few people at the shelter about his dilemma, and as always, their perspectives helped him think more clearly. But the real turning point came when he decided to reach out to Keanu. That evening, Gregory found himself once again sitting across from Keanu at their favorite cafe. The rain outside was gentle, tapping against the windows, adding a serene atmosphere to the conversation. "Keanu, I'm in." "A bit of a dilemma," Gregory began. "Richard, my old business partner, invited me to a charity gala. At first, I didn't want to go. It's the kind of event I used to live for, and it just feels like the wrong environment for me now. But there's a part of me that wonders if it could help the shelter. Maybe I could meet the right people, get some funding for the programs we've started. I don't know what to do." Keanu leaned back, considering the situation carefully. He didn't rush to answer. Instead, he took a moment to think, allowing Gregory to sit with his own thoughts. Finally, Keanu spoke. "You're facing a tough choice, Gregory. You've made so much progress, and it's clear to me that you're a different person now. But this gala, this world, it's still the world of your past. You're right to be cautious. It could be an opportunity to further your mission, but it could also pull you back into a life you've worked so hard to leave behind." Gregory nodded, grateful for the validation of his inner struggle. "I don't want to go back to that. I've seen the way that world can be. But I also know the shelter needs resources, and there are people who could help us make a bigger impact." Keanu's eyes softened with understanding. "I get it, and I think the answer lies in how you approach it. If you go to that gala, do it on your terms. Don't let the allure of wealth and status cloud your purpose. Go with the intention of connecting, not of impressing anyone. Go with the intention of sharing what you've learned, of showing people that there's a different kind of wealth, a wealth of love, of compassion, of community." Gregory took in Keanu's words, and for the first time, he felt a sense of clarity. It wasn't about avoiding the event altogether. It was about staying true to who he had become, no matter the environment. He could use this opportunity to share the lessons he had learned and to connect with others in a meaningful way. "I think I'm ready to go," Gregory said, his voice more confident now. "But only if I stay true to what matters. I won't get lost in that world again." Keanu smiled, his eyes twinkling with pride. "That's the spirit, Gregory. The real test isn't about avoiding challenges. It's about how you face them. You've already learned the most important lesson. True wealth isn't measured in money. It's measured in the relationships you build, the people you impact, and the love you give and receive. If you remember that, you'll be fine." Next month, Gregory found himself standing outside the doors of the grand venue where the charity gala was being held. The building was a towering symbol of wealth, shiny cars parked out front, impeccably dressed people walking in and out, the scent of high-end perfumes mixing with the crisp night air. For a moment, Gregory hesitated. He wasn't sure if he belonged in this world anymore, but then he straightened up, took a deep breath, and walked inside. He was determined to stay true to the person he had become, and if this was the test of true wealth, he was ready to face it. The evening was a blur of conversations, glitzy displays of opulence and laughter that felt shallow at times. But in the midst of it all, Gregory managed to connect with a few key people who shared his vision. He spoke honestly about his mission, about the work being done at the shelter, and about the importance of community. As the night wore on, Gregory realized that this world, while still filled with distractions, could also be a place for change, if he approached it with the right heart. And as the evening came to a close, Gregory left the gala feeling more certain than ever. True wealth wasn't about what was in your bank account or the fancy cars you drove. It was about the connections you made, the lives you touched, and the love you shared. He had passed the test, and he knew, with absolute clarity, that he was on the right path. The weeks following the gala were filled with a sense of new purpose and excitement for Gregory. He had gone to the event with his intentions clear, and he had managed to navigate the world of high society without losing sight of the lessons he had learned. The connections he made had proven invaluable, not just in terms of financial support for the shelter, but in the relationships he cultivated with people who shared his vision for a more compassionate and equitable society. But as Gregory continued his work, he realized that the journey he had embarked on was far from over. The path he had chosen was full of challenges, each one more difficult than the last. But now, instead of feeling overwhelmed, he felt empowered. He had learned to trust himself, to trust the people around him, and to embrace the flow of giving and receiving that made life meaningful. One morning, Gregory stood by the window of his office, looking out at the bustling city below. The shelter was thriving, the workshops and mentorship programs were growing, and there were even plans to expand into other communities that needed support. Gregory had built something meaningful, something that would leave a lasting impact, but there was still one last thing left to do. It wasn't enough to just create a successful shelter. He wanted to leave behind a legacy, a lasting change in the way people viewed wealth and success. That afternoon, Gregory called a meeting with the shelter's board of directors, a group of individuals who had supported him since the beginning. As they sat around the conference table, Gregory could feel the weight of the moment. This was his opportunity to share the next step in his journey. "I've been thinking a lot about the future," Gregory began, his voice steady. "When I started this shelter, I had a vision. But now, I realize that vision is bigger than just providing shelter for those in need. I want to change the way people view wealth. I want to shift the conversation from money to community, from ownership to connection." There was a brief silence in the room as the board members exchanged glances. Gregory could sense the curiosity, the uncertainty, but he also felt a spark of excitement in their eyes. "I want to create a model, a blueprint for what true wealth looks like," Gregory continued. "We've done a lot of great things here, but now it's time to build a movement that shows people that wealth isn't about what you have, but about what you give and how you share it. It's about the relationships you build, the kindness you offer, and the impact you make in the world." One of the board members, Sarah, who had become a close ally and friend throughout the journey, spoke up. "Gregory, I love this idea. It's bold, but it's exactly what we need. We've already seen the positive impact the shelter has had, and this would take it to an entirely new level." Gregory smiled, encouraged by her words. "Exactly. I don't want to stop here. I want to make sure that the work we're doing doesn't just stay in this building. It needs to ripple out into the world. We can create a ripple effect that inspires others to rethink what true wealth means." The board members began to discuss the plan, their excitement growing as they brainstormed ways to bring this vision to life. They talked about partnerships with other non-profits, educational initiatives that taught financial literacy in a new way, and community-based programs that emphasized the importance of giving and receiving in equal measure. By the end of the meeting, they had a plan, one that would take the shelter's work beyond its walls and into the heart of the community. Gregory was filled with a sense of fulfillment he had never experienced before. He had spent years chasing after financial success, but now he realized that the greatest reward was not in accumulating wealth, but in the joy of creating a positive, lasting impact on others. Later that evening, Gregory sat alone in his office, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. He thought about the man he had been, the ambitious, driven businessman who measured success by the numbers in his bank account, and the man he had become. He had learned that true wealth was not about possessions, but about the connections you made, the love you gave, and the lives you touched. As he sat there, his phone buzzed with a message from Keanu. "I've been hearing about the movement you're starting. It's incredible, Gregory. You're doing something that will change the world. I'm proud of you." Gregory smiled as he read the message. He could feel the warmth of Keanu's words, the deep sense of validation that came from knowing he was on the right path. Keanu had been more than just a mentor. He had been a friend, someone who had shown him the true meaning of wealth and had pushed him to be a better person. "Thank you, Keanu. I couldn't have done this without you." He paused for a moment before typing his next words. "But I think we've only just begun. There's still so much work to do. And this movement is just the beginning. Together, we can create a world where true wealth is measured by what we give, not what we keep." Keanu's response came swiftly. "I have no doubt you'll make it happen. The world needs more people like you, Gregory. Keep pushing forward." With that, Gregory felt a sense of peace settle over him. He wasn't just starting a movement, he was beginning a new chapter of his life, one that would be defined not by material success, but by the love and connections he had built along the way. As the sun set outside his office window, Gregory felt a deep sense of contentment. He knew that the journey was far from over, but he was no longer afraid. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, but it was also filled with endless possibilities. And as he looked out over the city that had once represented everything he had left behind, he realized that the wealth he had found was the wealth that truly mattered, the wealth of the heart. This was just the beginning.